Hello everybody, Thy Lord Root here, and welcome to another episode of Kerbal Space Program. Now, I believe we're on our fifth episode, and we've done some pretty interesting things so far. We've, of course, put the Kerbal into orbit, and we've, also launched a couple of satellites. We created a UAV, and we've even done a manned docking. That's pretty impressive, but I think it's about time for us to set our sights onto the moon. And so, we'll go ahead and do that. I'm going to bring up the vehicle that will help us achieve this goal. And while this is loading, I think I will go ahead and tell you a little bit about it. This is an unmanned vehicle. And you might be asking, man, Thy Lord Root, like, we just recertified the manned program. Why are we going through the trouble of putting a sort of unmanned probe? Pardon me. And the real reason for that is because, as it turns out, dealing with the moon, it does present a whole lot of new challenges. Of course, as we've learned, putting something up into orbit really isn't that hard. But what if we want to come down? Like, what if we actually want to come onto the surface? And this is probably a very good question to ask because, if you do take all the effort to go to the moon, you at least want to land on it, right? I mean, everybody remembers Neil Armstrong is a hero of Apollo, but nobody remembers what happened in Apollo 10 when they were doing an orbital lunar flight. I can't even remember the pilots off the top of my head, so I mean, definitely, if whoever's in this rocket, maybe it's Jebediah or whatever, if he wants to become a national hero, then he needs to land on the moon. And so we've added to this two extra probes. We've added a rover and a sky crane that we're going to use to deploy it. And you can see here we've sort of reused our launch stack from our Moho 8 experiment. And so we'll just go ahead and launch this real quick. And I figure I'm going to go ahead and take some of the time while it's loading and while we're getting out of the atmosphere to talk a little bit about why this rocket is a little bit smaller. And so I think that most people's first thought, and this includes intermediate players that I've seen, and to be fair, like, I'm nowhere near good enough at this game to be an intermediate player. I'm definitely, like, not as good as a pro player like Scott Manley. But I do kind of understand the intuitive sense that a bigger rocket will, get you into orbit and you don't have to worry about it. And I think that's compelling for a lot of people. And I mean, you can't really blame them for thinking that way because all of the larger, all of the real rockets were pretty large. I mean, if you look at Saturn V, for instance, that was the thing that took man to the moon, and that was a fairly, big rocket. In fact, I think it was both the heaviest and the tallest rocket to have ever been produced. In fact, there was even going to be a step up for, I believe, either lifting heavy payloads to the moon, or maybe even looking at Mars missions, and that was a rocket called Nova. And so, I think to us, we're kind of used to this idea of launching really big rockets to get to something like the moon. And to be fair, the sort of orbital velocity that a spacecraft has to reach in order to even get into orbit, let alone to get to the moon, is a lot higher, a lot more significant than it is on Kerbin. But the reason you want a smaller rocket is generally because it's more maneuverable. I mean, you build these huge rockets, right, and they turn out to be incredibly difficult to control. And so, I mean, for instance, they may start to wobble, and that really throws a damper on being able to control it. And so, you know, you might add in maybe like, I don't know, like RCS units to redirect the rocket a little bit, and you might add in addition to that, you might add in, oh, I don't know, like struts to keep the rocket from wobbling, and all that adds mass, further exacerbating the problem. So you can make a very large rocket, but it turns out to be very difficult to control. So a smaller rocket, in my mind, tends to be better. I think it's a little bit better to be conservative in rocket design, but I mean, like I said, I'm not really like a pro player. I mean, it just seems to be what works better. And I mean, if you think about it, you know, we don't launch satellites on these huge rockets ourselves. I mean, we pretty much, when we're like launching a small enough mass, we go with the rocket that will do the job. And I think that really, you know, this shouldn't be too much of an exception, because, I mean, if you pay for a huge rocket where you spend most of the time getting it off the ground and most of the fuel, then that can become a problem. And I think that those of us who have taken a little bit of physics, like, let's say like a high school physics class, well, what's one of the first things you learn about? You learn about, well, Newton's second law, right? That force is equal to mass times acceleration. And the consequence of that is if you do the algebra, then a higher mass object requires a lot more force in order to, you know, in order to speed it up or whatever, in order to get the same amount of acceleration. So, it's especially important to know Newton and KSP, because KSP uses Newtonian mechanics. I mean, you're not going to gain relativistic mass by going some appreciable fraction of the speed of light, so it's not a bad thing to know Newton. And in fact, in this game, I believe Scott Manley again showed that you can go faster than the speed of light. Or maybe it's the case that the speed of light in this game is much higher than in the real universe. I mean, who knows, but one thing that is apparent is that Newton will get the job done in this game, and we've seen a lot of that. So I'm just going to bring this up into 110 kilometer orbit, which is a little bit higher than we are used to. And we'll be hitting that point pretty soon. And we're going to circularize, because I don't think we'll hit the moon at the right time, but we're not going to put too much effort into circularization, and I'll tell you why. The first has to do with the fact that we have this fuel tank on the back that we want to, you know, we want to drop it off. And that, oh, well, I accidentally killed that maneuver node. But, we want to drop this thing off so that it falls back into the atmosphere, and so hellfire can rain from above and kill some unsuspecting Kerbin, or Kerman, or whatever, you want to call them. And that is really just a way to keep, our fuel tanks from becoming a hazard in the future. I mean, we saw in the first video just how much of a hazard they can be, because they can more or less, wreak havoc if you accidentally happen to fly into one. And so it's not a good thing to leave them lying around in orbit. We at least want their orbits to degrade over time so that they fall back to Kerbin. And as it'll turn out, like, we may not actually need to take so much care in this, because we're going to drop our fuel mid-stage. And that means we are going to, basically, when this fuel gets sufficiently low, we're going to switch back to the, spaceship view, and we're going to start the workhorse of our vehicle, which is a nuclear rocket engine. Those things are pretty nifty in this sort of mission, because you actually get really high specific impulse from them in orbit. I think it's like some 800 seconds or whatever. And so that is a very cool thing to have on your mission. Um, because, I mean, you could take this with a less efficient engine, and it'll work. But you need more fuel, and more fuel equals more mass, and in reality, I mean, we really don't want to, we don't want to, overdo it, although, we're back here, looking at our, we're looking at our thing. This is one thing I don't like about, like, the way the maneuvering nodes or whatever are handled, because it seems to be the case that once you fly past them, you can't make any corrections. But we're in a good enough orbit, and what we're going to do now is we're going to target the moon, and we're going to do a transfer burn. We are actually going to go out somewhere around here, maybe around Periapsis or so, and we're going to, in fact, let's start at Periapsis. Although this descending node may be a better place to do it. But we're going to get ourselves an orbit that intersects the moon. And we want to, we want to be very careful about this, because we want a decent periapsis, because we don't want to crash into the surface of the moon, and we want to come in there at a decent angle. But, we also want to get there in as little time as possible. This is 3 hours and 30 minutes, which I think is not terribly bad. I've been able to do the moonshot in under 2 hours, but the trouble with that is you end up with your apsis very, very close to the surface of the moon, or actually inside the surface of the moon. It becomes a ballistic trajectory. And so the idea here is that we're going to basically you know, get to this orbit using a very elliptical orbit, and then we are going to attempt to, capture ourselves within the moon's orbit once we, get there, because when we get there, we're actually going to be in a type of, trajectory you probably haven't seen, which is called a hyperbolic trajectory, which basically means we're going to whip around the moon and we're going to leave its influence, and it doesn't show the escape. Oh, it does, and we're going to go in there at a very high velocity. And so this thing is actually going to lie to us. Now, it's actually going to take about 2 minutes or so in order to do this. We're just going to start now. And hopefully, we will, reach the moon before too long. So we have this 2 minute burn here. I guess I'm going to talk a little bit about, if we were to take a manned, vessel to the moon, what ways we could approach it. One way that we could approach it is that we could do what's called direct descent. And this is what most players tend to actually do on KSP. And I think that happens largely because money is no object. And because the moon has less gravity, you can afford to take everything with you. So, the idea is that you don't. You land, you do your business, and then you basically leave, and that is, good enough for most players. The reason why we didn't do this during the Apollo program, of course, we again being the US, because I am from the US, well, the reason for that is largely because it's prohibitively expensive, not only really to get the equipment there, but even just to build the rocket. I believe I mentioned Nova before, just a few minutes ago. Nova, I believe, was actually designed for direct descent, because you did, with, a direct descent profile, you did need, an incredibly powerful rocket to get you up there, so that, was something that in a real space program, and probably in career mode, probably is not going to be feasible. There's another ascent profile that's called Earth Orbit Rendezvous, and in this case I guess it would be Kerbin Orbit Rendezvous, but the basic idea is that knowing that it doesn't take all that much fuel to get up into, to take the journey once you're in orbit, you launch I guess you can't really call it an interplanetary vehicle. I think you might rather call it a, more of like, an inner celestial body vehicle or whatever, but the idea here, of course, is, that, you have this vehicle that really doesn't take all that much thrust once you get it off the ground and into orbit. If you do that, then what you would end up doing is you would end up launching a secondary vehicle that's more along the lines of... Well, there we go. I think we moved past it a little bit, but the idea is basically that you launch a secondary vehicle that, basically, would dock with this thing and end up you know, taking the whole kit and caboodle to wherever it is you're trying to go. And this was actually, for a long time, the preferred profile, if I'm not mistaken, for approaching the moon. But there is a bit of an issue that comes with, docking in itself is intrinsically dangerous. And you can imagine that you have this really massive fuel tank with lots of hydrogen and oxygen, or kerosene and oxygen, and if you accidentally hit it at orbital speeds, then you actually, end up with this issue to where, you actually will probably make the thing explode because, you have a lot of energy. And so, you want to be careful with that. And so there was a third option, which is basically that you take with you an orbiter and a landing vehicle, and in a sense similar to the direct descent profile, you end up more or less, taking everything you need to get to the moon, but when you actually get to the moon, you have a separate lander vehicle that you take down, and that lander vehicle doesn't require nearly as much fuel, and because it's substantially lighter, it's more maneuverable, it doesn't take nearly as much energy, and so it makes a whole lot more sense. And this is, of course, exactly what happened in the Apollo program. And so, in this case, like, our profile is kind of vacuously direct descent, or direct descent rather, because really ascent is meaningless here. We're not taking off of the surface. We're landing, and then we're pretty much doing our thing here. So we are about to get to our target here, and I think we'll just speed that up a little bit. We're about to be in the moon's sphere of influence, which is basically the area where the moon's gravity has any kind of significant effect on us. And so, assuming that, it seems to be stuck here. I don't know why that is. The sphere of influence changes seem to be very laggy. And, hopefully, we won't have to restart it. Oh, there we go. So, yeah, we are now going to try to circularize here, and this takes quite a bit of doing, but we do have a lot of fuel to burn and a lot of space with very efficient engines. So I'm just gonna bring periapsis down to let me in fact kill the time warp real quick. Bring this down to I don't know, I think I'll bring it down to 125k. One thing that would be really nice is the ability to see where your apses are going to end up whenever while you're doing this, so you don't have to constantly check. That would be really nice. That may be hard to pull off, so we're gonna sit down here at 120k. And we need about 400, 500 meters of delta V. But that's actually not too terribly bad. I mean, you can see here we're almost completely burning retrograde. I bet you I might even be able to get that a little bit better by burning on apoapsis. It doesn't look like it's going to improve much. But we'll be bringing this orbit down very shortly. So we have several minutes to go. I'm just gonna go up to I don't know, maybe 50, or I'm at 100 speed right now. We don't want to overshoot this point because we'll of course escape the moon, and I've already overshot it a little bit, but not really too much to too much detriment. I mean, we still have plenty of delta V left, and we'll have a little bit of correction to do. I have a feeling that our periapsis is not going to be quite where I want it to be. But, you know, we'll worry about that when we get there, because establishing an orbital trajectory is only half the battle. We actually are going to land a probe on the surface of this thing. And getting into orbit, as we know, is very easy. Even with what appears to be very limited fuel. I mean, we look like we don't have all that much fuel, but you'll see this thing, very quickly begin to whip around, and we'll end up with a lot more fuel than it looks like we actually have. And so when we get to about 100 or so, you can see we definitely want to tone this down just a little bit. We're already losing a significant amount of velocity. This has to do with something that, as I understand it, is called the Oberth effect, to where high energy rockets gain additional fuel efficiency, and this is definitely a high energy rocket. I mean, we have probably relative to Kerbin, I mean, we're moving at about 300 or 3 kilometers per second. Not quite 300 kilometers per second, because that is the speed of light. And of course, we are not going the speed of light. We're, going, we're going in a very, something very much not the speed of light. And so I imagine if we were to go to the speed of light, we would get insane fuel efficiency. Of course, if we wanted to slow down to 0, that might be a bit of a problem because of how much energy we have. So I'm just going to burn this up into 125. That seems to be good to me. And we're now going to circularize. So we still have quite a bit of fuel left. But I'm hoping this should be enough. I mean, you can see here our delta V requirement is very, very low. And we will, before too long, achieve orbit. And so our periapsis is little bit lower than I'd like. I don't think we're going to get much of an improvement out of this, so I'm just going to, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have another barn, at our new periapsis, and I'm just going to circularize from there. So we're already more or less oriented in the proper direction. Let's go ahead and do the time warp together. And so, because of the eccentricity of our orbit, it's going to take a whopping 3 hours to get to our destination. I mean, that's not insubstantial. Fortunately, we have, we have the the time warp. That helps a lot. In fact, we can even go up to 1,000 here. I think that would be called for at this point. Just because of the fact that, we are already pretty close. And we don't want to overshoot this at all. So I'm thinking I might start burning around 30 seconds, because maybe even 15, because this thing has a habit of lying to us, and really, I do want to conserve fuel for reasons that you'll see here in a bit. So we're almost on the mark, and we're now talking about maybe a 20-second burn. As you can see, we still have plenty of fuel left. Well, the question is it going to be enough? But I think we are going to find the answer to that question very shortly, because we want definitely to have a little bit fuel left. I mean, we do have plenty of fuel. I mean, we barely used any delta V there. But we don't want to overdo it. So let's just go to new periaps, bring this thing down quite a bit. Bring it down to so it's 118, and our new, I think we can do a little bit better on that. We have 109. I think we're not going to get much better than this, because we have an eccentricity of about 500 meters, so I mean, we're probably good now. So I'm just going to get to ready to burn pretty soon, and we barely have any delta V here. I mean, this will take maybe a couple of seconds at the most. And so I'm pretty much going to burn that at t equals -1. I mean, it makes the most sense to me to do it there, because we can get a lot of delta V out of that engine, especially now since a lot of our fuel is gone. And so we will just wait, and I'll go right now. You can see that our change in delta V is, our delta delta V, I guess, is, that's good enough, I think. Our delta delta V or whatever is, you know, very low. So, here I'm gonna do something that I'm gonna try not to make too much of a habit of, but this is delicate work. I'm going to quick save. And from here, I am going to attempt to land on the moon. And so here we have our little probe, and it's going to survive just fine on its own. What we really want to worry about now is, you know, getting onto the surface, and that is not going to be easy. So, we do have a couple of options here. First of all, actually that was a mistake, I didn't mean to do that. Let me reload. I mean, first of all, I'm gonna use this to get me down to the moon itself. And the thing we need to do, and something I really should have thought about when I was doing staging, I really should have used like a decoupler here. But I'm going to decouple this node, and I'm going to use our RCS in order to just give us a little bit of clearance. And I won't go too far out. I think this is probably as good as we're going to get with that. And, you know, we'll face it down towards, you know, we haven't even seen the moon yet. And so I'm just going to move this. This thing has become very maneuverable. In fact, it has enough RCS fuel, I believe, to fly home. But I'm going to switch to our landing vehicle. And, from here, I am going to attempt now to, I guess I didn't think about what I was doing there. I am going to very quickly, you know, add a maneuver in to, I do not want to do that, to land. And in reality, what we're going to do is we are going to orbit once around this, because a direct landing is a bit foolhardy of an idea, at least in my experience. So I'm going to land either in this crater or close to it. And in reality, something we could do, in fact, is we could instead of making a direct descent, because that requires a lot of energy, we could instead give ourselves a low orbit. Now, if you're used to flying in Kerbin's atmosphere, then it becomes a bit of an issue, because, you know, you're probably saying, wait a minute, that's like 45 kilometers. We're going to, you know, we are going to burn up and, you know, re-enter and whatever. And it turns out that the moon has no atmosphere, as you probably could have guessed. So, the idea then is, if we get to a low enough orbit, we might have a better chance of picking a spot that looks good to us. That comes at the cost that I believe we will eventually need to, you know, we'll eventually need to to deal with this thing in such a way that we are going to have to lose a lot of energy very quickly. And that's why we've kept our, our second stage on us, because it makes a lot of sense. So we're just going to, wait for, 20 or so minutes to pass. And then we are going to, attempt this burn. And this is another really short burn that, in fact, I have missed completely. But that's okay, we can make up for it. And so, where are we now? We're at about 30. I want to go a little bit higher than that. Although, 35 actually seems to be a pretty good place. I'm gonna work from there, I think, because I think that's a fairly respectable orbit, and it clears us out of the way of any mountains, which, we definitely do not want to run into. And there are mountains on the moon. And so, I think, that is probably... See, that's 42, that's 28. I actually want to bring this down a little bit more. There, that's a better orbit for us. So, this time let's not overshoot it. We still have plenty of fuel. Enough, I think, to slow our descent. But we do want to be careful with this. And there's another thing we have to contend with now, too, is that this entire body is a little bit more wobbly than we might prefer. But we'll deal with that. I mean, it's not a huge issue, so it's not going to take too much longer for us to get down to where we need to get going. And this time I'll try not to overshoot it as much. With try, of course, being the operative word. And because we need so little delta V, I don't mind cutting it as close as I have. Because we can burn this off in a second, I think. And so we'll just, get this set up. Where is our periapsis? I don't want to descend too much, because that would be bad. I mean, it's not that it would be bad, but it could throw a wrench into our plans, and I do not really fancy that idea too much. So I think we're about as good as we're gonna get here. I'm going to switch to the orbital view, or the staging view, or whatever. I'm gonna quick save because this very next part is going to be extremely difficult to pull off. So we're pretty close to an area where we can burn. Now we have to find the place to descend. So I'm going to go near this crater. I don't know that I'll entirely be successful with that, but we can try. and as you can see, this is very precarious. I mean, this is something that, could end up badly because the moon is very hilly. And so, one of the things that we might end up having to deal with is the fact that, we have, these hills that we might land on, and of course that will knock us over and cause problems with the landing. So we do want to be careful with that for sure. And I think now is the time to start that burn. Of course, I'm a little bit early here, but that's hopefully not going to make too much of a difference. Again, we have that, that engine of ours. And I would call that close enough. I mean, it's good enough by my standards. So, now we are pretty much committed to landing this thing. And in fact, we may just land it here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by, well, really landing it here isn't a good idea. I'm going to wait until I get down to about 10 kilometers or so. And it is pretty important that, you know, we do, you know, wait to a decent point to get down, because we're now falling with the moon's admittedly weak gravitational pull, but, if you know, about gravity, like, or about force in general, if we don't burn, if we burn too soon, then we end up wasting a lot of energy, because, what we'll end up doing is we will end up, more or less, you know, more or less, you know, oh, what am I trying to say? Let's go ahead and stage. Oh no! Oh, that's why we have quick save. Let's try this again. Actually, you know what? I didn't need to do that, because I completely forgot that because I'm using a sky crane, my, I completely forgot that by using a sky crane, I am pretty much, you know, I need to fire vertically. I just forgot to add that stage in, I think. And so we are going to try this. I'm actually going to start burning this engine a little bit higher up, because I don't know if we lost enough velocity. And essentially what we're trying to do here is we are trying to, essentially get this down, of course, to where we have a ballistic trajectory, which is a nice thing to have, you know, when you're trying to land. And really, we should be landing pretty... We should narrow that down a bit. But the other thing we're trying to do is we're trying to kill our horizontal velocity as well. And so we do want to come in, if we can, we do want to come in on top. But, you know, we don't necessarily have to. I mean, we can do a little bit of finagling when we get down. So, the main deal is that we want to lose our horizontal velocity, because you don't want your lander, you know, sliding around while you're trying to land it. That could be very bad. So, we are reaching this point pretty soon to where we probably want to burn. And I'm just going to go ahead and get in position for that, because we are very rapidly losing altitude, and I don't want that to result in a crash. And so, let's just go ahead and we'll start burning. Just to get our horizontal velocity down as much as possible. I mean, the fact that we are, you know, let's just go ahead and jettison that. The fact that we are, doing this tends to, it tends to mean that, you know, we did save a lot of fuel by, you know, taking advantage of that stage. And what we basically want to happen is we want our retrograde or whatever to end up here in the center. Now, I don't know if, I reckon it probably would not hurt to, it probably would not hurt to, you know, to very slowly, to dampen our ascent. And of course, this is about the time we'd probably want to retract our landing gear. The question is, are we going to land on a hill? And that may be likely. I mean, we bring up our resources. We still have plenty of fuel, so I'm not as worried about it. The main thing is that, you know, we want this thing to get pretty close to centered. I have a hard time gauging how, oh, I have a feeling we're coming up on this pretty quickly. So we did not lose enough. We did not lose enough velocity, it seems. But we still, you know, we still have ways of rectifying that. Hopefully what this will mean is, that, you know, when we do land, we do want to be careful that we do not overdo this, because, see, this is quite a complex series of things to coordinate, as you can see, because we don't, you know, we don't want to hit this thing very hard. we want to go in for as live a landing as possible. And it looks like, will we make it? And I think the answer to that is no. But we can... we can, you know, do something about that. We can, we can attempt to maybe... you know, possibly, if nothing else, you know, bring this thing in a little closer. I mean, the good thing is at least we know this thing is capable of landing. I think what I need to do here is I need to get this thing right about here. Hopefully, that will bring us back to where we need to go. I think we have a much better landing spot now. I mean, we do... See, now we've got a little bit too much vertical. And I think that, in a sense, that our little mishap has caused us a bit of an issue. But yeah, we're landed now. So, we did land on a bit of a slope, but this seems like a minor one. So the last thing we want to do here is we're going to hit space and drop our rover. And our rover now is just going to, on account of not really having any brakes, is just going to start scurrying around the surface, going pretty fast actually. But we can turn on our lights, which, you know, will help us maybe a little bit. These things are supposed to be a whole lot easier to drive in SAS mode, or without SAS mode, and that seems to be the case here. But you know, we can go backwards. It seems like my light is sort of in the wrong place, but I guess at least I could always tell where my rover is. And so we've made a significant step. I mean, we haven't really, you know, landed anybody on the moon, but we learned a lot of lessons about what sort of skill that might take. And we gained some practice. I mean, after we launch maybe enough probes, then we could, in principle, you know, do another landing, as it were. And, you know, maybe we could even modify this whole space crane thing to, you know, to bring us a real, like, rover for astronauts. And this might even be useful because this will help us find suitable landing spots that are not on slopes, which would definitely be something, you know, that, I'd want to find if I were, going to land on the moon. So, anyway, this has been Dilord Root, and, I suppose I will see you next time.